We wrapped up the state board about 15 or 20 minutes ago, so. All right, Kim, let me know when we're ready to start.
We are good to go. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Advancement and Development Subcommittee. So I'm Michael Marr. If we've not met before, good afternoon. And I'm joined by Ms. Stover. I think she's on with us now. Maybe not yet.
Not
Okay.
yet.
All right, so let's kind of, I guess, make our way through the slide and we'll kind of get into the work, right? So a couple of things we'll cover today. We'll cover our meeting minutes from April 20th and the agenda for today. And do we have those available now?
They have been posted and shared.
Okay. So do we need a motion to approve our agenda and our minutes?
Yes.
So if someone would want to make
I
a
move
motion.
I make that motion to
So
approve the minutes. Shall we start with
Your motion
approving
to
or
approve
the
minutes.
agenda?
Then we'll do the minutes first, or fine.
All right. I move to make a motion to accept the minutes from April 20th. It's Nancy Rupert.
Second. Gregory Monroe, I second.
Okay. All in favor? Maybe I should say anyone opposed. Okay, I don't hear anyone opposed, so I think those minutes are approved. Okay, and our agenda. Do we have is it possible to pull the agenda up on the screen?
Hold on just a second.
Sure. Great, thank you. So our tasks for today will be to look at the agenda of the minutes, which we're doing now. I'll give a very brief introduction into the work that we're going to find ourselves in today. We'll take a quick look over the survey results that were sent out, the survey that was sent out and the results that have come back. And then we'll move into some breakout groups where we will begin to discuss the expectations for moving from one category to another. And so we'll kind of talk through that. Do we have a motion to approve that as an agenda?
Motion to approve, Don Phipps.
Okay, so we have it moved.
Gregory Monroe, second.
Thank you, Dr. Monroe. So it's been properly moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, thank you all. Okay, so Kim, do you want to just scroll down a little bit for us and we can kind of look at the survey results and breakout groups and whatnot? And Kim, did either you or Robert want to talk through these a little bit since you all deployed that for us?
Sure. So the first set of survey results focuses on the license transition point from the learning permit to license one, and the key knowledge and skills that were prevalent in those results focused on those areas of content knowledge and knowledge of standards, the classroom management skills, use of assessment and data to drive instruction, lesson planning and design, differentiation, adapting instruction to meet student needs, relationship building with students and community, cultural responsiveness, professionalism, and the understanding of history of the U.S. education. And then we also focused on the transition point from license 1 to license 2 for this particular meeting. And the key knowledge and skills were, we had those looked at through 2 different buckets, and one of the buckets was extensions to the above categories. The bulleted points are additions. So you can see that there's sub bullets for each of the areas that are listed below. So content knowledge and knowledge of standards that you see above for a learning permit to license 1 also has depth of knowledge. And then for lesson planning and design, there's 3 different sub bullets there that that dig deeper into lesson planning and design. And then also for use of assessment and data to drive instruction and differentiation. And then differentiation / adapting instruction to meet student needs. So it really builds on what's happening from learning permit to license 1 into license 1 to license 2. And then new categories that are mentioned for this level that you can see below. The mentoring, learning permit and license 1 teachers, digital literacy for learning, the use of technology, and then early development of personal philosophy of education. And then there were a few notes that went along with this. So ways to distinguish this from previous transition point: regularly applies basic knowledge and skills from license 1. So then it's transferred to license 2. You can see that is being applied, not just knowing the information or understanding it. And then mentioned EPP, pedagogical sequence of courses, specify proficient and advanced, and then evidence of these categories would be easy to identify. So you can
Great.
see how it builds on each other, the survey results.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Okay, so I'm going to move back over into the PowerPoint just quickly and kind of set the stage, and then we'll move into our groups. And so just to remind folks of some of what we've talked about previously. So our norms, so just ensuring that we kind of maintain our norms, that again, we should be putting students and teachers at the heart of this work. The purpose here is that, we're going to collaborate, and we're looking towards a consensus approach to the proposal, which should recognize that not everyone is going to agree 100% with every decision that gets made in this subcommittee. I think that is important, that we are mindful that we are looking for a consensus, but it may not in fact be unanimous. I think it is also important to note that all opinions are valued in this process, and that we provide time for individuals to share their thoughts. I know, a lot of educators on this, myself included, and sometimes we tend to talk quite a bit. We want to make sure we give opportunity for others to share as they see fit. We're trying to be as specific as we possibly can. So I think this is important in that when ideas are shared, it is helpful to be able to explain it, and so that we don't have any kind of miscommunication or misunderstandings. And then we'll just ask you to really be fully engaged. We're going to be here for, I believe, is it 2 hours today?
Yes, it's 2 hours.
Yeah, so 2 hours. So if you can give us 2 hours of your time today, dedicated to this work, it will be greatly appreciated. Okay. Some of our guiding principles, as I mentioned earlier, really thinking about what's the impact on children, what's the impact on students. And while it is important to think about the measurability of some of the things we're doing, ultimately the idea or the requirement for how to measure some of these things is going to actually fall to a different subcommittee. And so we can be a little more visionary, I think, in our work as we try to decide what the standards look like. And so if in fact they are difficult to measure, then we can certainly take that into consideration. But I'm not convinced that that should necessarily drive our work here. But we do want it to be authentic to teaching and learning. Our particular subcommittee, do we need them? I don't think we need a micro-credential. Well, there is a definition here of micro-credentialing and some additional resources. I do not want us to get bogged down in the idea of micro-credentials and defining. Ultimately, that is not going to be our work. It falls to a different subcommittee. So I want to quickly move through the measurement component and really just get to the standards piece at this point. Okay, so thinking about our particular subcommittee questions, right? So we are trying to determine what the essential practices are for North Carolina teachers at each, or North Carolina educators rather, at each of the various stages of the career, right? So when we think about that, the document that lists the 7 stages, beginning with the learning permit and the apprentice teacher and moving all the way through to the advanced teacher, our goal here is really to think about the essential practices of moving from one category to the next. And so what would the skills be, what skills are necessary then to advance between each of those categories? We can take under consideration how and from whom teachers might develop new skills and competencies. But again, I don't know that that's necessarily the focus of our work. Same with the confirmation that skills have been acquired. We want to certainly consider those, but let's not let that limit our work. And then again, with the verification and acquisition of those skills. And as we consider the essential practices and skills, we need to be mindful of both the North Carolina Professional Teaching Standards, as well as the NESIS, and then perhaps other standards that we use to inform our practice within the profession. So whether that's from the educator preparation perspective, the EdTPA or the PPAT, whether it's from a professional association, NAEYC, or Math Teachers Association or something like that. We need to be mindful of the different standards that already exist and then determine which of those are appropriate for our work today. And then thinking about the role of educators and the impact that principals, mentors, and teacher leaders might have on those educators. Okay. So our workflow here is to complete identification of skills for the license levels. And we have taken our initial survey. We're going to talk through that. We're actually going to move into some breakout sessions, talk through learning permit to license 1, come back, have a whole group discussion, and then, sorry, let me just make, for clarification, Dr. Evans, are we talking about learning permit to license 1, and then coming back as whole group, and then going back out to small group, license 1, license 2, and then coming back to whole group?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. And so then we will begin our conversation around skills there. And I think we are ready to move to the next. So from the survey, this is what we received back from members of the committee. And so this certainly is a starting point for us, but I don't think this is the exhaustive list. Okay, so everyone here, thank you. One, thanks for being being with us today. You received an invitation to access these Word documents. So we're going to move into breakout groups. We'll ask some member of your breakout group to serve as a note taker. And then we're going to begin working through the skills needed for the license level. We're going to take about 20 minutes to do that within the small group, and then we'll come back together as a larger group to discuss the findings. And so you have an individual who's a note taker. I would recommend that you also identify someone who's going to kind of report out the results from your group. And then one other point of note. So each group has a facilitator. The intention is not necessarily for the facilitator to drive the conversation or the work. So certainly Ms. Stover, myself, Dr. Sachs, Dr. Seiberg, Ms. Comstock are there to provide support, guidance, and input, but we are not there to drive the process. We hope that the individuals within the groups will help drive it. And one other note, a number of you in these groups participated in the Human Capital Roundtable. And so when questions come up about the intention of the work or decisions that were made within that group, it's always helpful for folks who participated in that initial work to be able to provide some more of that context as we engage in our work here. And so with that, are there any questions before we get started? Okay, I don't hear any.
I'm going to just take oh, sorry, Mike.
No, go ahead, I'm done.
I'm going to take a couple minutes just to finish assigning groups to everyone, and then I will make sure we have the 20 minutes, and then I'll start everyone in their
Great, thank you.
groups.
Is there already a document to work on, or?
So let me look. So in the SharePoint, you have access to the SharePoint, right?
Oh, that's what I need to find. Okay. Can you put it back in the chat, or do I need to go to my email?
Let's see. Of course, I just went there and my SharePoint crashed.
I found mine in my phone.
So to let everyone know, this morning I shared the folder with the breakout session documents, and you'll see session 1 subfolder and then a session 2 subfolder. And then within those folders, you'll find whatever group assignment you are, and that's the Word document that you can record all of your feedback, comments, anything that you decide to record as a group on that document. And it'll say what survey feedback. And then you'll also see outside of the breakout session subfolders, but it still remains in the breakout session folder, the PowerPoint that has the survey information. So please feel free to bring any of that up while you're discussing. So I sent individual invitations. If you need me to resend, I can do that as soon as I break everyone out into a group. Just indicate that to me in the chat. And we are ready to break everyone out into the first session.
Okay, great.
Kim, I'm here. Are you there?
All right, I don't know about these other groups. We had a flurry of activity in the last like 3 minutes in our group once we got going. All right, it looks like we perhaps have everybody back. And do we want to start with Robert? Is it best you think to start with just group one and kind of make our way through?
Yeah, logically, I think going through them sequentially makes the most sense.
Okay, so do we have group one ready to report?
I thought before we went on, we got pushed back out. Keisha said she was going to report for group one. That's what I thought I heard. You're muted, Keisha.
Oh, you didn't hear what I said. I said, oh, Tom, I cannot wait to see you next. For told me to start. No, I would love to. And we did start with our document, and I don't have that in front of me, but we talked about, started with content knowledge. And right before we ended for our break, we were having some conversations about at what level, what does that mean? What does that look like for a teacher moving into the license one? And we were talking about the need to be able to unpack those standards, not just knowing broadly the content, but being able to unpack those into kind of smaller chunks, so that teachers could identify specific lesson objectives and being able to plan lessons beyond that. We also looked at assessment, and really we talked about, with most of these on this list, there's going to be a progression of for our license one, there's going to be a basic kind of level of knowledge with this that will grow as they move into license 2, 3, 4, and on into expert teachers. So we talked about the assessment and the data piece, using data to drive instruction so that teachers at a very basic level is able to know whether the lesson objective was met. And we kind of ended there at that piece. We didn't get to any of the other, we were having a lot of conversations about those first two. Anything else that wanted to add, Laura or Don?
Okay, so my group was group two. And so we were thinking about, and Nancy and Dr. Gregory, jump in as you see fit. But some of the things we talked about were trying to frame this and think about not limiting the number and types of individuals who could become eligible, right? So we're trying to constantly be mindful of pathways and access and opportunity for people to become teachers. And so we really focused on this idea of somebody moving from an associate's degree to earning that first credential. And we thought about that in the context of like the old lateral entry model, where individuals had to do certain things, notably really just pass the praxis 2, and then they could kind of move their way into a classroom and get into a program that prepares them. So we were really focused on 4 areas that we thought were really required to move from the permit to the first license. And that was an understanding of the characteristics of students. And so grounding all of this work in just that, followed by cultural responsiveness. So thinking about how we build communities of learners who are respectful to all people, and communities of educators who are respectful to all people. Professionalism, and then having a content knowledge. And so I think, Tom, our maybe question with moving from one category to the next, when we think about that license 1, for somebody to go from 1 to, what's the difference of going the permit to 1 and 1 to 2? Does someone from the permit to 1, do we expect them to have done some baseline teacher preparation work? Because I don't see that in the language in the graphic. And because I wasn't part of the Human Capital Roundtable, I don't know what the expectation was here, because I think if the expectation wasn't that they had done some teacher prep work, then perhaps there may not be any requirements around lesson planning and differentiating instruction. It's really about just setting a place to be comfortable in a classroom working with children. And then you would have all of this other teacher prep type stuff for license 1 to license 2. Can anybody offer some clarity on that and how we've thought about this?
Dr. Mayor, this is Jeff Coltrane, and Tom, I'm happy to share a few thoughts on that. I served on the roundtable, and this was actually one of the questions that we were talking about in Group 5 is, license 1, I think as the pathway is laid out, is the bare minimum to get a, full teaching license currently, which I think in our current framework is just a bachelor's degree with a minimum number of course hours in the field in which you're teaching. And so at what point, if we're going to require something different from a learning permit, from someone with a learning permit to go into license 1, which would be pedagogical skills, because that's sort of what you described, beyond just a bachelor's degree, then at what point are we differentiating them between license 1 and license 2, which requires some level of pedagogical or content knowledge? So I think that's a key question I think we have to wrestle with. And I wonder if we need to think about, instead of just moving from a permit to license 1, as, permit to license 1, 2, or 3, because you could see someone with a permit move all the way to 3 if they've met all the requirements on those. But I think that's a good question, because at what point does, the college student that just graduated with a bachelor's in math that wants to become a math teacher, and they can go ahead and get a license 1, what differentiates them from the individual who got the associate's degree, became a apprentice teacher with a learning permit, and then moves into license 1 after they complete their bachelor's?
Yeah, that's Jeff. I think that's kind of the same. That's the conversation we were having as well about this idea of bare minimum. Okay. Okay. Well, I'll think about that if we want to move on to the next.
Dr. Marr,
Yes.
I think there's something that's bubbling up in the entry and placement subcommittee, and that may be helpful in this context. And I don't think anything's been decided yet, but there, one of the questions they had was clearly a teacher with a learning permit would not be a teacher of record and would be working with a teacher, would be the teacher of record. And this is an apprentice model. But they questioned a license 1, if we're looking at this new model and reforming things. A license 1 teacher, we're kind of stipulating this teacher has a bachelor's degree and perhaps sufficient content hours in the subject area. Do we want this teacher to be flying solo? And it was a very good question, and I think it's a good question to ponder here. And this was coming up in our group, is like, to what level do these teachers need to demonstrate these skills? Do they need to be at a rudimentary level, a proficient level, a deep level? And so I think this is a really interesting kind of wrinkle to the way we're thinking about this. If the license 4 teachers, these advanced teachers, how do they interact with the not just the apprentice teachers, but the license 1 and license 2? Do we, until they get to a place where we feel their depth of knowledge and their skill in pedagogy is sufficient to let them fly alone? And we know from the research that kind of job embedded training and assistance is crucial to helping folks be successful and persist in the profession. So I think it's just a really interesting thing that y'all could think about, and perhaps joining with that prep and entry group to say, yeah, we like that idea of kind of graduated oversight from the permit all the way to the license 3 is an interesting concept. I just thought I'd share that.
Well, and Tom, to piggyback on that, I wonder if, this might be radical, but maybe a learning permit can't move to license one, because we would expect if you've been an apprentice teacher that you have gained some level of pedagogical or content knowledge where you could demonstrate that mastery for level license 2 or license 3. So maybe a learning permit can't move to license 1. It's actually license 2 or license 3. And to be able to get licensed, then they have to demonstrate that knowledge. That would actually make it probably closer to the medical model, where a resident doctor has to do a demonstration of knowledge as well. And if they've been a part of the education system, we would hope that they could do that, because they've been working closely with a master teacher during this time.
If I could just add to that, I think that thinking about the medical model, residency model as something to potentially emulate is, I think, a really great idea. I think it's something where just the research bears out that it really is the sort of quality and quantity of a teacher's clinical experience and how much mentorship and guidance they receive during that really ultimately leads to their quality of preparation. And so I similarly have concerns about, having a licensed 1 teacher be a teacher in residency, as opposed to having it look a little bit more like what it seems like the apprentice teacher looks like truly being a resident. Like a medical resident means that you're working alongside other doctors. Nobody said go do surgery and we're not going to supervise you, right? And I don't think we should be using that model for students, right? We want to ensure that, they get 1 chance at every grade, and we want to ensure that they're going to learn what they need to learn, and not have a teacher who may not be able to meet their needs. So that would be my offering, is like thinking about truly making that license 1 a true resident. Like it says teacher in residency, but right now they're actually the teacher of record, which really isn't a residency model. And so making it more of a true residency model, and perhaps for license 2 as well, sort of maybe there are levels of residence, but sort of like medical residents complete, multiple years of residency. But yeah, something to think about.
And so the teacher in residency holds a bachelor's degree. To become a resident, you have to have a bachelor's degree, correct? That's for Tom or Jeff or anybody who's worked on human capital.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Right, Tom?
To hold say that again, I'm sorry.
You have to have a bachelor's degree.
To hold a license 1, yes.
Yes. Okay. Because I'm trying to think through this too, right? And I think that's really important, the whole pairing. So we have paired with an advanced teacher mentor, but I think what I'm hearing now is the recommendation is really that they are a co-teacher. Is that the recommendation?
For the license 1?
Yes.
So I don't think we've landed anywhere on what that relationship looks like, but clearly the prep and entry folks were moving towards, this is not, I check in with you once a week. This is more like the opportunity culture model, where you're working with a multi-classroom teacher who's constantly in your classroom assisting.
Okay. Yeah, I like that as well. Nancy, that's a good question about how it'll be funded, but that's not our concern. That's actually the compensation committee. So let them worry about that. We build what we want, and then we let somebody else figure out how to pay for it.
I will say I think it's a great idea, and I think makes perfect sense. The only downside to that is that's more restrictive than where we are currently. Is that teachers can enter the profession right now without that level of supervision, which I'm not saying it's wrong. I think they should, and without those requirements in place. So we'd be moving to something slightly more restrictive than what we have now. Not to say that it's not right. I'm just pointing that out. So,
but really the only restrictive part of that is really it's a cost burden, right? And an employment burden perhaps on a district
and personnel. Do we have enough
Yeah.
teachers who can actually provide that co-teaching model?
That was one of the things that we brought, that was mentioned in group 2, was it can be a blessing and a curse on both sides, that you now have another pool of people that you can bring in for staffing. But then if you don't have the master teacher that you can pair that apprentice with, and you kind of, painted yourself into a corner.
Yeah. So I want us to be able to get to the next group so they have a chance to report out. But one of the things that our group, as we talked about, was trying not to get bound by kind of either the conventional wisdom, or begin to worry about, well, can we in fact do this, or how does it matter? And I'm wondering if we really should just be pushing the envelope and understanding that, yeah, perhaps we might have a personnel issue, a human capital issue, but let's not let that hold us back right now. Let's build the model that we really want, and then we figure out the implementation piece a little bit later, or perhaps. And
Great
so,
point.
Patricia, I see in the chat, Patricia has her hand up.
Yeah, I think the conversation may have moved on a little bit, but what I was thinking is the idea of keeping the students in the forefront. And so we want to make sure, as we think about allowing, different entry points, that the teacher who's spending the most time in the classroom with the students is capable. And I wonder if it's a new model, and I understand that, like, you can hire someone now with no education experience to teach, but that isn't the predominant way that people enter into classrooms. I just want to make sure that the people who are in classrooms teaching are qualified to do that, and helping the K or P12 students succeed. And so the conversation that we were just having about co-teachers and someone who's present often in the classroom with someone at the level 1, I think it's essential. And I know that we're not talking about feasibility and money, but I think that especially when you get into more rural areas or smaller schools, we do have to be thinking about, can this really happen? Are there going to be the advanced level teachers, and who can provide the mentoring? So I don't think we should completely disconnect from that reality check. And I think we really have to keep in the forefront, are the people in the classrooms people we feel good about teaching students?
Great, thank you. Okay, is it group 3?
Yes, some of these things have already been alluded to, but we're really looking at the skills needed to advance the learning permit. We had 8 areas that we discussed. One was general understanding of content standards, grade level, some level, and we also realized we're not going to figure out how to measure this, but the level of classroom management is important. Relationship building, general lesson planning, knowledge skills, general knowledge of assessment practices, using data to make decisions, or at the very least, identifying what data to be looking for, because they're very early in this and they may not even know how to interpret data. Understanding the effective, I think this last year really showed how important this is, understanding the effective use of tools to support digital age learning. Another way of saying they're using digital age learning tools to support student learning and success, and also how to engage students and their families appropriately. And I also would like to go back to something that I think Patricia said, and some others have alluded to, all the guidance you have about, moving forward, and it says a bachelor's degree or industry certification. Just keep in mind that not only in rural areas, but probably exacerbated here, but across the state, one of the areas that we have that's very much in need and very popular is in career technical education on trade and industry education, and they're not going to have a 4-year degree. I'm just going to tell you that. But they are usually, if they stay with you and go through some type of pedagogical training, that can be absolutely some of your most engaging teachers. But I just wanted to throw that out at the end of my comment.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, we also had the conversation about CTE and T&I teachers who may not need a bachelor's degree for their particular work, and so being mindful of that as well. The one question that I would have for your group, for group 3, are these the standards you would expect for someone to move from that apprentice to moving into the level 1, if the level 1 meant they were paired with a co-teacher?
I don't know that I will speak for the entire group. I hope they would jump in. I think these would be important for them to know. And again, I think it goes back to conversation. I think Jeff said something very interesting earlier that got me thinking about almost like a medical license. But to be a license 1 level, whatever we decide is that. To be there, whether it be in a co-teaching situation or not, these would be things that we felt like would be very important for them to have some level of proficiency in and comfort in, because these are going to affect so much of what we're trying to do in the classroom. I don't know if I'm saying that in a very articulate way.
Yeah, and I want to add to what Jeff just anyway, I want to add to that. We discussed this a little bit in our group, which was there's degrees to these things. So when we captured our ideas, I think one of them says general understanding of content standards. But if you took these and just put them as statements, so content standards, classroom management, relationship building, lesson planning, assessment practices, using data, within that, there are degrees or depths of understanding that would slide from left to right. And I think where that slides could change depending on where we put these, but the nouns, the lists, those categories of things, I think our team's pretty solid that those are the categories. But I think the degree or level of depth of knowledge, I think there's room for variation of that depending on where this fell. Michael, does that answer your question, sort of?
And is this what you would expect walking into that license or leaving that license?
And we talked a little bit about that too. I think what we expect walking into that license is an openness to these things. And this actually connects to some other things that I don't know are within our purview. But if we were to think about what is a district's obligation for beginning teacher support, that these actually would be the kinds of things that would be within a beginning teacher support program that the district would help to support and cultivate within that. So there's this intersection and overlap that I think is playing into some of this as well.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And of course, I'm just co-chairing this group, so it's not my group right to own or anything like that. But I just want to also be sure that we're not becoming more restrictive now with the new system than we currently are. Okay, group 4.
Yeah, this is Andrew. So a lot of what's been shared has further complicated our initial discussions, but I'll share with you a couple of thoughts that came out regarding the idea of the learning permit side of things. The thought was, that's more about essentially knowing or understanding what needs to be in place, but not yet demonstrating that. And then at the same time, there was some really rich conversation around, well, this idea of moving to license 1, if that license 1 person is a standalone in charge of the classroom, then the hope would be that you would have more than just knowledge of the skills, but but actually can demonstrate some of those things, because at that point you're the teacher of record, and you know, we don't want to ill serve children. So I think some of the discussion that came up in the previous groups is really fitting here, which is if the person ends up being the teacher of record, then I think our group would lean more towards the notion of having to demonstrate some skills for that level 1. If that is not the case, then I think there's some more flexibility in there, but also necessitates very specific kinds of support for those folks as they move from one area to the next. There was another point that I think would be helpful to bring some clarity, and that was the group was sort of jonesing around the topic of the level of granularity, like how specific. And Robert, I know you mentioned that just a minute ago, this idea of, well, we can talk about skills, and then we can talk about subgroups within those skills, and then we can talk about, you know, super fine behaviors within that, and we can get down into the weeds. And so they were there's this sense of a little bit of paralysis here. So I was hoping that Dr. Tomlin or Jeff or others that are on here, if you could share a little bit about how you're envisioning where the appropriate level should be. And let me share with you what I said to them. What I said to them was, I think at this point we're throwing a lot of stuff on the board to see what sticks. And I think we should be thoughtful at the skill level in general and not get into the minutia. Although if minutia emerges, we should document that and have that sitting on the sideline. But I think it's more about, you know, brainstorming what are those actual skills that need to be in place, tangible skills that we can actually hang our hat on to move from one level to the next. Do any other roundtable folks? Would any of you like to chime in on that thought, or others in general? Perhaps someone is speaking but does not have their mic on, or it's just a pregnant pause and really awkward for me.
I think it's the latter.
Yeah, Andrew, I apologize. I had a bit of a distraction. Can you repeat the issue? Sorry, not the full thing, just yeah.
Yeah, so the question is around, when we talk about this idea of level of skill, like what skills are needed. The question from this group, and I think it happened in a previous meeting with this team as well, this subcommittee, is how deep do you go when you start unpacking this idea of skills? So we've heard about skills, but within those skills, there's sub skills, and you can run down rabbit holes to a point of paralysis. So in these initial stages, how deep do we want to go when we're thinking about these specific skills?
I think it's a great question. I don't think the roundtable dove down that deep into that question. I think that was really sort of what I think the next phase of this work, which we're all doing now, would sort of dive into. And you know, I would guess, and maybe that's another place for this work to start is, you know, if you think about a license 2 or license 3, what does a minimum amount of pedagogical skill look like, or a minimum amount of content knowledge look like to be considered, you know, eligible for one of those licenses? And I'm not sure what the current requirements are now, but that might be a good place to start, is what knowledge and skills do we currently require, and is that sufficient? And if so, then how do we think about where that fits within this bigger framework? Because you're right, you could, you know, jump into rabbit holes very easily. So.
Okay. All right. Can we actually go to the last group, and then we'll come back? Jeff, is that okay if and then we come back to your question? And this way we'll have all 5 groups that we'll have reported.
Absolutely. Sorry. And I was just responding to it.
No, I think that's, it's important. I want to keep it at the front. I want to get through this next one, and then I want us to just regroup for a minute, consider where we are, and then what our next step is. So group 5.
The group 5 was myself and
Oh.
Dr. Bryant and Megan. So I don't know, Dr. Bryant and Megan, do you guys want me to share out?
Yeah,
or
that's fine.
okay. So I think we were wrestling with a lot of the same questions that the other groups have brought up. Is what are those skills that would be required from learning permit to license 1, and so we sort of discussed, what does it mean? What skills are typically expected or required for you to receive a bachelor's degree? And so, we sort of thought about, obviously, some of the key things would be a general knowledge of higher level mathematics, science, history, and English. A level of critical thinking skills that we often see from completers of bachelor's degrees, and then the ability to communicate orally and through writing as sort of being 3 key areas we think that probably differentiate a bachelor's degree recipient from someone without a bachelor's degree. And then, we sort of wrestled with the same question of what amount of subject or content specific knowledge would be required? Does it need to be in the individual's, in the content area in which they're teaching? And then, should we require some type of demonstration of pedagogical skills beyond just a bachelor's degree, or does that then lead us to discussing that they'd be moving to a license 2 or license 3 because they're now demonstrating those skills? So I think that was sort of a key question: is, are there skills beyond just what we would expect to see from a bachelor's degree?
Okay. So go ahead if you're going to say something.
No, that was it. Dr. Bryant and Megan, I don't know if there's anything else you would add.
Not at this time.
Nope, that was great. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, so I just want to circle back and see where we are at this point in some of our general things that we all can agree to, perhaps. I think so everyone is clear that a learning permit is someone who holds an associate degree. They work under the direction of another teacher. That teacher is at level 4, license 4. I think our recommendation, Tom, or whoever brings this to the other groups, I think Tom, is that the license 1 teacher also works under the direction of a license 4 teacher. Does everybody agree to that? So that we then are moving towards a true residency model for license 1 individuals?
Michael, I think we need to be very clear that we're talking about not being the teacher of record then.
Yes.
Which is a big shift in the current model. And just for 2 seconds while I have the floor, I will say some of the chat comments are spot on with this idea of this is an opportunity. I know I've heard other people say it, but I really do think that this is an opportunity for our state to reconceptualize how we prepare educators and lead. I've heard several folks talk about this as an opportunity for us to lead the nation. It is, in the sense that I don't know of another state that really has implemented a true, robust, across the board residency as it is intended model. And that would be a major commitment to education, and a fiscally and with P12 student resources that would help move us away from the churn that we are seeing. If you look at data trends, the new teachers in our state are they're cycling in and cycling out, and we are losing veteran teachers with experience. We are losing those people who have all of that knowledge, and we're getting new people in, and we're opening up the funnel, but then they're leaving. And
Yep.
so, a true residency model that would really give folks supports. I mean, the residency folks in our EPP program right now, some of them are doing fine, but there are a lot of them who are struggling big time because it is so much to be a brand new teacher and, you know, do all these things right out of the gate when you don't have that background preparation. It is a big, big, heavy lift. And so I would just echo a lot of the work I see in the chat. And you know, Michael, you mentioned trying something different and taking it in a new direction. That would be a big shift in a really positive way.
I agree with you. I mean, I'm 100% on board with that. And I think it's like I said earlier, yeah, I mean, I recognize this could be a heavy lift. It could be expensive. It could be a lot of those things. But, you know, I get the sense is that that's our obligation now, right? Is to propose the best possible program that we can, regardless of what the cost is. I mean, I am a realist. I know that there is a budget that has to be balanced, but we were tasked with creating something that is professional and appropriate, and I feel pretty strongly about if we believe as a group, if this group believes that License 1 should be a true residency, it is enacted under the direction of a co-teacher, that this person is not the teacher of record. I think we do that. And if we recommend that, I would strongly then encourage that we have to consider that baseline of skills needs to be very small, because individuals are going to, in fact, be learning a lot of this on the job. So to ask them before they actually qualify for the teacher in residency license to have a lot of teacher prep work defeats the purpose of the residency from my perspective. Folks disagree with that?
If I can add a piece to that too, it's my in looking at this from learning permit to license 1, to get to license 1, these are the skills that the people are going to develop along that way. It's not necessarily what the people come in with. Is that your take on it?
So can you say that again one more time, Nancy?
Sure. It appears to me that with this chart that is here, what we're looking at is from a learning permit, which means the person comes in basically with an AA or experience, that really, in order for them to go to the next level, which is a license 1, which is the total, which is residency and I think if we're going to use that term, we need to define it, because right now in our state it's defined completely different than what I'm hearing in here, is that they will develop these skills along that way between learning permit to lesson 1. And it does not say that that will take place in 1 year.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, as you said that, I'm really wondering if the learning permit, someone receives their learning permit once they have their associate's degree or the appropriate industry credential, and then perhaps they earn the license 1 residency license when they receive a bachelor's degree. And that's kind of it, right? That we're not specifying what you need to have within your bachelor's degree, but if you have received a bachelor's degree from an accredited university, then you are eligible to be a teacher in residency. That would open the door to people who otherwise might not have a chance to ever become teachers, and might in fact be good teachers. And we would then be required as a committee to define what this residency means, I think, and we would use more of kind of the national and the literature that's out there around residencies. They are not the teacher of record, is what we would recommend. And then what we could do is say these knowledge and skills that we are currently talking about now become the expected knowledge and skills you develop on the path from teacher in residency to license 2. And it's the license 2 when which might be the point at which you then become a teacher of record because you have demonstrated mastery of your content or your pedagogy. And then we would take the knowledge and skills to go from 2 to 3, and that would be then you're able to demonstrate content and pedagogy, and that's like where teacher prep students finish. Does that make sense? Do folks, and as kind of a straw man, what do folks think about that? And of course, Tom and Jeff, let me know if that's not in line with the round table.
So one comment that I know I made when I responded to the survey about the different levels and sort of what skills would need to be held to move from one to the other, and I may have made this comment in our last meeting too, I can't remember, so forgive me, but I feel like separating content and pedagogy sort of feels like a false separation.
Sure.
So to teach math, you have to know something about math and you have to be able to explain it to someone else, right? And so it's not clear to me. I think like even in just this discussion about license 1, we talk about, knowledge of the standards, and the standards are about skills that you want students to learn, which requires pedagogy. Like it's hard for me to separate out content and pedagogy as being two things that exist separately, and like what we intend by that, I guess, in terms of thinking that someone could be a teacher of record and maybe know math but not know how to teach it, or know how to teach but not know math. Like I guess I don't, it's hard for me to wrap my head around that, and maybe I need an example or something.
So honestly, that's like the current model in North Carolina, right? So I got a bachelor's degree in mathematics. I can basically go and become a teacher of record teaching high school math. And I know, and this is like my example is from 25 years ago, but my last year of teaching high school, I actually was mentoring a gentleman who had retired, I think from IBM, came over to teach math. He'd never taught a day of math in his life. And it was very challenging. But that's the model, right? In essence, if you have content, you can walk into a classroom and be a teacher of record. And I think what we're suggesting now is that's not enough to be the teacher of record anymore. It's enough to get you in a classroom under the direction of an advanced teacher, but it's not enough to make you the teacher of record. Does that answer your question, Melissa?
I think so. I think where I'm confused is where license 2 sits. Like it's clear to me sort of where license 3 is. It's clear to me where license 1 is, and license 2, I'm still not clear whether we're saying that person would be the teacher of record, or whether they would have to do perhaps a shorter residency or some sort of other type of
I'm with you there. I'm with you there.
Experience to make sure they could then demonstrate that other piece before they actually became the teacher of record.
Become teacher of record. Yes. So I'm with you on that. So ordinarily I like to think really globally, but I think in this context, I find myself thinking very linearly in trying to really carve out section to section so that we don't get because I worry a little bit that because we could have started at any point on this continuum, I think, but the challenge then becomes is we start getting into all these rabbit holes, and then it's like Andrew mentioned earlier, the paralysis, and I want to try to keep us out of that. So I do want to get to this question of license 2. Are we okay to hold that until we get through this first part?
Michael,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, I was first. I wanted to first respond to what Michael said earlier about where he was hearing this group going of the bachelor's degree being just license 1, and then demonstrating content and pedagogy for license 2 and license 3, with the license 1 being teacher of record. I think that is the vision that the roundtable initially had. Again, just in terms of mapping this out, with the exception of, I don't think we had really wrestled with license 1 being not a full teacher of record. I think the idea of a co-teacher would be good. I do think that maybe the licensed one should be a teacher of record, but not the only teacher of record, if that makes sense. Because even a medical resident is still performing surgeries. It's just they're doing it with the doctor by their side. And so I think, in thinking about it that way. But to come back to the license two question that Melissa asked, I think, and maybe this group can think about how to structure everything below a license three separately visually. I think the idea wasn't that it's linear per se. It's that the idea would be to provide teachers who are progressing towards that license four the opportunity to advance both in salary, because remember, license one, license two, and license three under this vision would have different salaries, but also to be able to demonstrate their knowledge along the way in different ways. Currently, you've got this list of things you've got to show, and you either do it before you walk in the door or you do it after you walk in the door. But everybody who comes in the door at the same place is getting paid the same amount of money. They're getting the same amount of support. Everything's the same. So the idea here was to differentiate among those things. So, license two and license three are both temporary. They are steps along the continuum to get to license four. So a teacher might be in license two because maybe in their first year, they were able to pass the praxis two or whatever it would be to demonstrate their content knowledge, but they haven't been able to demonstrate their pedagogical knowledge yet. Well, we want to reward them for making that progress. So you're going to get to move to license two. You're going to get a salary bump because you've demonstrated that progress. But maybe one person did pedagogy and not skills and not content knowledge. So it's about the advancement. It's not about it being it's not about it being a final stopping place. It gives another step along the path of demonstrating and then being able to reward the teacher for making that level of progress towards becoming a fully licensed expert teacher. And I do think, to Michael Mayer's point, we have teachers right now, particularly at the elementary level, who have come out, they've demonstrated pedagogy or skill, but they haven't been able to pass the math praxis or the foundations of reading. So they would be sort of in this license two kind of state right now because they haven't demonstrated all of those pieces yet to get to license three. So it does exist. It's not structured like we think of it now, but I'm wondering if, based on this conversation, maybe it's better to think of the learning permit, the license 1, 2, and 3, more of not as a linear process, but more of almost like not a circle, but some other type of visualization versus steps along the continuum. Because you could have someone with a learning permit, let's say I complete an associate's degree and then I enroll in an online 2+2 program, but I'm also an apprentice teacher in my home high school. And I actually graduate with a full-blown elementary licensure and I pass all the requirements I need. I'm skipping 1 and 2 and I'm going straight to 3. I was an apprentice teacher. I've then demonstrated my content and pedagogy, and I'm now in license 3. So license 1 and 2 didn't matter to me. Well, you could have an apprentice teacher that's going to be moving along that continuum once they get their bachelor's degree. So I think we have to think about it not as much of a linear, but more of sort of, I don't know how you phrase it, but if that makes sense.
So I'm on board. I'm actually on board with you, Jeff. So I think I didn't explain clearly what I was thinking. Actually, when I was talking about thinking of this linearly, I was thinking about the process that we're going to use as opposed to the model.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense.
I am fully on board with your example where someone starts as an apprentice, does a 2+2 program, and jumps all the way to level 3, to license 3. You skip 1 and 2. Totally get that. In fact, I'm fully on board with that. I think that's a great opportunity for people. Does that clarify a little bit?
Absolutely. And I was trying to also make sure that I clarified for Melissa too, that sort of distinction as well, that what that looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
So this is Tom. Can I just address a little piece of what I heard there? So I'm speaking from my participation on the Human Capital Roundtable. I'm not speaking for the Human Capital Roundtable. My skin in this game was that we take these teachers new to the profession and put a laundry list of requirements on them and say, get all this done in 3 years. There's no scaffolding, there's no support. So we just took, from my perspective, we just took the requirements and broke them apart and said, okay, the two major requirements are content and pedagogy. You get one, let's let somebody focus on getting, establishing the competency in one, reward them, and move them up and let them focus on the next one. What you guys are raising, I think, is really a smart way to think about this differently, is let's do these in tandem, but let's really define what the level of depth is that moves you from a license 1 to a license 2, and not artificially separating these two skills, keeping them married. But I think the idea here is, what's the scaffolding, what's the level that moves you from a license 1 to 2, and making sure the employee gets the reward for meeting those benchmarks. I know I wouldn't, it doesn't sound like Jeff would. If this came back to the human roundtable, everybody would gasp and be like, oh God, no, we can't do that. I think you're doing what we all hoped you would do, is perfecting this high level vision. You're making it better. And that's my 2 cents on it.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, so I'm going to suggest that we do not go into another breakout, that we just stay in this larger group for now. And we have about 25 minutes, and I want to respect people's time. And again, thank you for being here, those of you who have hung in with us the whole time here. So with 25 minutes to go, what I would really like us to come to some consensus around are just these first 2 categories, the permit and the license one. And do we have some recommendations we want to send forward to the other groups? And so so Melissa's thrown out a straw man for us. I think what we should do is perhaps collect some of these. The next meeting we come back, we can beat these up a little more maybe. I've thrown out a straw man. We can really kind of work through what we think the model should entail, right? And then we can really get into the business of defining the competencies or the standards or whatever it is we need to do at that point. So I liked the, I like this analogy of like the key to the door, right? So what's the key to the doorway to the apprentice teacher? And as I read it, it appears to me the key to the door to the apprentice is having an associate's degree. So that is correct and true? Yes? No? And I'll
Except
take
for
silence.
those that are going with the CTE, I guess, and
or a credential, or the
yeah.
appropriate credential. So you are credentialed in some way, either you have an associate's degree or you have the appropriate credential. And so if you have one of those 2 things, you are issued an apprentice teacher's permit in the state of North Carolina. You are not a teacher of record. You work as a co-teacher. Good? Everyone good with that?
How is that different than a teacher assistant right now?
I don't know. Is it different, Tom?
It may not be. And so, this is a great question. The intent here is not to jeopardize that classified position in any way. This is to create a clear path to licensure that's distinguished from the TA. So I would imagine many of our TAs would want to approach this model, and then I would imagine there are many of them that would not. And so it's really, I mean, we need to be very careful. This is not in any way meant to diminish our current TAs or make them feel like they're less than. It's just providing that opportunity for those employees to self-identify as I am somebody working towards this pathway, or I'm somebody that's choosing to remain in the classified position. I think the recommendation from the Budget and Compensation Committee is that we have additional funding to support these apprentices. They are not being carved out of existing TA budget with the LEAs have.
So, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nancy.
I was going to ask, is there a limit to how long you can be an apprentice teacher as opposed to a TA?
That would be, one would presume yes, but that is under the purview of the licensure subcommittee. If you've got recommendations on that, we will gladly take those.
It says that it's only valid for up to 2 years while earning your bachelor's degree. On the top of the green rainbow there.
And to earn a bachelor's degree in 2 years, if you're an apprentice or a teacher assistant, would be really almost, that would be really difficult, I think, a 2-year degree when you're working full time.
So it sounds like we have another recommendation, Tom. And the other recommendation is to extend the license, the validity of that license from 2 years to perhaps 4 years.
Yeah, we've actually already, Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've already raised this with the licensure subcommittee that you need to set the, how many hours do you need? And you've got to balance that against how long are you going to give them to complete. So those two things have to really work in tandem together. This is a known issue, but if you've got recommendation, I mean, they're exploring it, but if you've got recommendations, we're happy to pass them along.
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm taking a point of privilege as the co-chair here and just saying that so please, if you are on this call with us and you disagree with me, I absolutely jump in and tell me. Otherwise, I'll keep kind of moving through these things, but I think I've got 2 recommendations at this point. One is that you earn the apprentice teacher permit based on the completion of either the associate's degree or the appropriate CTE credential, and that permit be available to someone for up to 4 years. And then I believe we are getting close to maybe agreeing. And yeah, so as long as they're working on it. And so, I think as you were talking about that, Nancy, one of the things I was thinking about is somebody with an apprentice teacher permit may have access to scholarships and other kinds of grant programs to help them with their bachelor's degree that they wouldn't get if they were a traditional TA. And so that might be one of the ways that this ultimately gets kind of hashed out, right? Is that I am in fact working on my apprentice teacher on my residency license. A second recommendation I think we are coalescing around is about the requirement for the teacher in residency, and it's that license level 1 is that it's a bachelor's degree or industry credential, and it is not the teacher of record. It's a co-teacher. Does everyone agree with that? Okay. And so then with about 15 minutes to go, we have 4 groups who have contributed some content to what they believe the requirements will be. Can we, Andrew, Kim, or Robert, can we capture those documents and then do a little bit of work on them to see where we have some consensus, and then move that to our next subcommittee meeting, and we'll focus the work of the next subcommittee meeting on the required skills. And then we can really have the conversation about what's the difference between license 2, license 3, and then the kinds of skills we expect moving from license 1 into license 2 and license 2 into license 3 and so on. Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah, we can do that.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Michael, can I ask a question? I'm
Yeah.
just trying to, I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Video. I'm just trying to wrap my head around everything I'm hearing. So what we're saying is, the proposal is that you could be an apprentice on a learning permit without an associate's or the CTE credential. But then when you get a bachelor's, you could be a license 1, right?
Yes.
So getting a bachelor's degree would be the credential that moved you from the permit to the license 1.
Yes. That's the suggestion I've made.
Okay.
Which,
So if somebody was an apprentice teacher, let's say they enrolled in the new associates for teacher education, and they continued to go ahead and get a degree in teacher education, they would be from an apprentice teacher to a license 3, right?
yeah, if they meet whatever the criteria we established later on in subsequent meetings, yes. You would jump right from the permit all the way up to 3. That is possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to think through. I would like a little bit of time to think through. I mean, I think it's great to give some feedback to the other committees, but
Okay.
some of the ideas that come out of this thing are the best ones are when somebody else starts talking to me about what
Yeah.
this could look like. So, some time to process would be welcome.
Yeah, and honestly, right, like, so Laura, I mean, you could, as an institution, I'd be identifying or working with like CPCC, picking up those apprentice teachers, running them through UNC Charlotte's program to get their bachelor's degree, and they come out at the back end and they actually have their bachelor's degree in teacher prep.
Yeah, I think part of the I mean, we have those relationships now. We get a huge number. Thankfully, we've got great relationships with our community college partners. I guess I'm just trying to think of one of the things that has come up in recent weeks in other venues has been related to the messaging of some of the initiatives, because I think we're in a place now where a lot of our stakeholders, the policymakers, the legislature, these committees, PEPSC, we've got all these groups that are all trying to address these issues. And sometimes I think we don't always get the full feedback from everybody. And so I worry a little bit about the messaging to folks. If I'm a person, like if my goal is to be a teacher, then I really, and I know that's not what we're talking about now, but I'm just sort of spinning the wheels here. If my goal is to be a teacher, then the thing that would probably be the most economical and direct would be to go enroll in an EPP program, because that's the thing that can,
Yep.
sort of push you over. And we're creating a lot of, I don't know. I'm all for opening up the path, but I do worry about not supporting folks once they're in that path, or that they end up taking things that cause extra time and expense that they don't necessarily realize at the moment because they're just trying to kind of get through it. So I just want us to think through all the logistics and all the possibilities around what makes sense too for the individuals that are pursuing this. Like we have folks in our residency programs right now who they have finished our program, but they haven't passed their testing requirements that are mandated. So they are having to re-enroll or continue with an enrollment in a program just so that they can check those boxes, even though they finished a program and their principals are saying, hey, they're fine. I would love for them to just go forth and convert, but they can't. And so I just I want us to think too about what makes the most sense for the individuals economically and conceptually.
Yep. And so all of that is well noted. And I agree with you, right? The most expedient path clearly is through an EPP. I think with the kind of effectiveness pieces, right? So that seems to me to be on the table here, that in the future, perhaps there are some different measures of effectiveness. And so, but that, that's not necessarily our subgroup. So we can certainly send them suggestions from our subgroup. But again, there's a group working on that. The other piece that I think, I often have thought about in this work is, like you, I've spent the vast majority of my time in educator preparation, but I've been trying to think of the other ways in which, this might work outside of that. And so I think this provides an opportunity for people to test the water, so to speak. So I can actually get in, work as a resident, find out that in fact teaching is not for me, and I will not have made the financial investment, right, when I should have done something else. And I learned that pretty quickly. So I also think about that as part of this. But so I agree with you. I think we have some suggestions on the table. So Tom, maybe at this time, we're not ready to make formal recommendations to anyone. But if you'll let other committees know, these are some of the things that we're grappling with right now. And we can let this go. And then the next meeting, we can kind of regroup, talk about it once more, see what kinds of issues bubble up from the field and from other stakeholders, and then move through. So we'll give folks that processing time and so on.
Will do.
Laura, does that address your concern?
Yeah, I think so. Since you brought it up, Michael, I will ask, and maybe Tom is the one to ask about this. Which group is working on the effectiveness measures, or is that something that's just sort of bubbling up across all 4 groups?
No, that is clearly in the licensure subcommittee's purview. As you can imagine, that is a daunting task for them. So we are, yeah.
Thank you. I'm just curious which group was working on that.
Yeah, and I'm in that subcommittee too. And just, I think the note that I just put in the chat is sort of to that end that, we're sort of talking about some of these things sort of in the current state, right? That like you have to pass the process, or you have to, being enrolled in a program means being like taking coursework, whereas I think there are some alternative models out there, like a true apprenticeship program. You actually earn credit by toward your degree by working, like it's work-based learning, and you earn credit toward that, right? And so I think to the sort of point about like we have to think bigger and not just be constrained by the way we currently do things. I think that subcommittee is trying to maybe wrestle with some of those pieces, but it's helpful to have thought through some of them here and be able to take those back.
And this is Jeff. I'm on my phone now. Sorry for. I just wanted to echo. I thought one of the points that Laura made about for residency teachers that have not been able to complete or to meet the requirements yet and can't convert. I think that is exactly one of the challenges that the roundtable was trying to wrestle with and thinking about this vision. And that I think in the same way that the licensure subcommittee is thinking about how do we measure effectiveness, I would challenge this group to think about how do we measure or allow teachers to demonstrate those content and pedagogical skills through other means than what we currently do. Because I think to the point about those residency teachers, Laura, that you mentioned, that their principal and you all know that they're fine, but for some reason they haven't been able to meet those, make the demonstrations that are necessary. What are ways that we can allow those teachers to demonstrate that effectiveness so that they can convert to either, right now, obviously, I guess it's an initially licensed teacher, or in the future to a license 2 or license 3. And I would just echo agreement with Michael that I think, even with this pathways vision that's been laid out, going the traditional route through an EPP is still the cleanest, the easiest, and I would say the most lucrative in terms of this model. Because remember, if you can demonstrate both your pedagogical and content knowledge, which most of the graduates from our EPPs do that before they walk into the classroom, they start off at a higher salary than if you come in at the other end. So I think that rewards both the work that our EPPs do, but also rewards the teachers that choose to pursue that route and really get those skills before they enter the classroom.
Michael, This is Al. I have a question.
Yes,
what
sir.
what if a person enters the pathway with a master's degree? Would they fall in license 2?
Yeah, I think they, no, actually, I think they fall in license 1 unless they demonstrate whatever this knowledge and skills that we set forth in license 2. And in fact, they could come in as a license 3 if they meet. So our next subcommittee meeting, we'll start to get into what are in fact the knowledge and skills we expect at each of these categories. And then that would determine where an individual fell inside of each of the different licenses.
Okay.
Okay, are we good to wrap for today? Do we need a motion to adjourn? Do we just adjourn? I'm not sure of how formal we are.
A motion, please.
Second.
Well, I need a first motion. Kim can't make the motion.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that was Kim. I make a motion, we adjourn.
Okay, moved by Nancy, second.
Gregory Monroe, second.
Thank you, Gregory. We will be in touch with the next subcommittee meeting and some direction, and we'll focus on the standards. So it's been moved and seconded, and we will adjourn. Thank you all again for your participation today.